Yes, my old friend, I've come to talk with you again.
In order to get transferred to National Top End, prisoners have to go through a process called Progression RMT, the Risk Management Team meeting. That itself is made up of managers and governors within the prison the prisoners currently housed in, and it would typically be the governor in charge, or what's referred to as the number one governor, often the deputy governor, the head of the intelligence management unit or security within the prison, the residential manager, and a representative officer from the hall, usually the prisoner's personal officer. There may be a few others present depending on circumstances for each individual prisoner. But the basics are the prisoner must have had held their low risk category for, I think it's at least 3 months prior to the application. They must be governor's report free. Now, a governor's report is where the prison accuses you of a breach of the rules and you're then taken up in front of a governor to plead your case, and you can be found guilty or not guilty. That's a whole discipline process, but you must be report free for, I think it's 3 months prior as well, and have, I think it's 2 negative mandatory drug tests, or MDTs, within a 3-month period prior to progression, or the application for progression. There is also a police background check carried out to ensure that there are no outstanding charges or any other matters of concern where the police would be involved. Whilst I could not carry out offending behaviour programmes in prison due to the fact that I am innocent and therefore cannot discuss matters of offending because I haven't done them, I had carried out what's called a PRA, a psychological risk assessment, which is a very in-depth one-to-one series of interviews with a psychologist where basically they peel your mind apart and see what's going on. I had gone through a PRA which over the course of 2 meetings took up around 8 hours, and the report stated that there were no psychological issues of concern for me, and that the author, who in my case was Lorna Gray, the head of clinical psychology for Central Scotland Prisons, based in HMP Shotts where I was at the time, she was endorsing my move to less secure conditions, as they're called, the National Top End. I attended the RMT, or the parts that I could attend in Shotts. I was asked a series of questions by the different members present, answered them as best I could, and they informed me that they were approving me for progression. I'll start from the start of my time at HMP Greenock. Arrived on the 19th of July, I think it was, 2021. Transferred from HMP Shotts. This is supposed to be a national top end, so this is the start of a phased reintegration into community through limited community access. So I came here and it took a little bit to get used to the new regime of Greenock. Criswell House is the national top end unit. It was a little bit odd getting used to things like our doors don't get locked at night when the staff go off shift. We're locked in the sections, but we're free to move around and interact with each other 24/7 basically here. So that was an odd one, not being locked in a concrete box every night for the first time in 17 years. I was informed that my sentence management plan would be along the lines of around a year to 18 months in HMP Greenock, given that I was already a year into what gets commonly called the 4-year window. The 4-year window is for life sentence prisoners. It's the end of the punishment part of your sentence, where you're eligible to progress to less secure conditions. So that would be either here at HMP Greenock or to the National Top End Unit at Barlinnie. You're supposed to spend around 2 years at Top End and then the next 2 years at Castle Huntly in the open prison. But I was already a year into my 4-year time, so I was originally informed that my sentence plan would be slightly shortened just to work in line with having me in the best possible position to seek parole come April 2024. But then when I received the actual paper copy of my management plan written by a different manager, it was the full 2 years here, consisting of 1 year of SELs, which are supervised extraordinary leave. It's basically you go out into community either on a shopping trip or to visit a place of interest like a museum or something, or go to a close family member's house for around 2 hours, and you're escorted by escort staff. Currently the company is GOAB. You qualify for SELs after a period of 8 weeks, but due to issues with paperwork, it was 6 months before I got my first SEL. To this day, I've still not been able to ascertain where the problems were coming from on that. Nobody was willing to accept responsibility for that. But I had them booked, and the first 2 bookings were cancelled by GOAB due to insufficient staffing levels. But then I eventually managed to get one. I can't remember the date, but it was towards the end of January 2022. I went shopping on a shopping trip to, as my community-based social worker was at that point refusing to sign off my mother's home address for community access at that point, despite the fact that she has moved away from the New Battle area. So the shopping trip went fine. There were no issues at all. It was an odd experience for me, just out and about to GOAB escort staff, just trailing behind me, visited a few shops, bought some toiletries, bought some games, bought some food. I kind of moved everywhere at a fast-forwarded pace, just with the excitement of it. But that went well. Like I say, there were no issues at all during that, so that had worked out despite being 4 months later than should have been. It was a tiring experience. I didn't realise how tiring until after I got back to the hall, and it was exhausting. But it went good. It went good, and I felt good about it. So that was fair enough. Things were working out slightly delayed, but as they should be progressing. I just continued my day-to-day routines. I work in the gardens party here, so maintaining the gardens within the prison's perimeter, grass cutting, things like that, general groundskeeping duties really, which I enjoy. I'm out and about and working with plants and natural things, so that was good. And try to keep myself occupied the rest of the time by gaming on the computer, just keep my head occupied for as much of the time as possible really. According to my sentence management plan, after a year of SELs, an application is meant to be put in for what's called the first grant of temporary release. It's it's effectively a license to be out of the prison unescorted. So that would allow you to go out and get work placements outside the prison and to take outings to a family member's house unescorted. That process is meant to take no longer than 12 weeks. At the time until recently, it has been taking an average of 10 to 12 months. And some guys here have even been waiting close to 18 months for their first grant to be sorted out. SPS claiming that it's due to a staffing issue and a backlog from the COVID lockdown period. I've heard of other guys' applications being returned because headquarters wants to know what the name of their first pet was. And that type of sending it back for these questions can add months onto the timescale of a person's application. But many prisoners here are in contact with other prisoners through friendships of guys they've known throughout the years and developed good friendships with. Many of those in HMP Berlin at the national top end unit there, but being informed from the prisoners there that their own applications are taking far shorter. Some are close to the proper time scale of around 12 weeks, but others it's around 4 months as the new guidance has been put out in order to attempt to cope with the backlog from COVID, allegedly. But the very fact that it's taking so much shorter for the exact same process between the two different prisons, a lot of guys here find it absolutely sickening. And I know of a lot of guys who have put in for transfer requests to Berlin just because Berlin does not seem to be having the issues that Greenock is having. And top of that, there are some guys who are according to the prison, their applications are being returned from headquarters asking some ridiculous questions and wanting more information. And on some occasions they're coming back 4, 5, 6 times for extra information, whereas from what we've been hearing from Berlin, that's not the case happening over there. So you have to question what's the problem with HMP Greenock, because it seems to be here that all these issues are arising, all these delays. It was a bit disconcerting to be hearing those things, but I was still early on trying to be a bit hopeful, but I started to try and examine the timescales of what that would mean of, say, taking around 12 months for an application to be processed. That would add effectively an extra year onto my overall management plan. I tried to discuss this with the then hall manager and asking that my management plan be revised to accommodate this time scale, and the hall manager stated to me, well, that's not what we're going to be working to, that management plan. My response to him was, well, you're the one who created it, so why have you given me this one if it's not the one we're going to be working on? His response was, well, it's just to put something down on paper, but I'll be working to something different. And I have a right to have a hard copy of my management plan, so I asked him to put down on paper what he's actually working towards and give me a copy of it. And his response was a flat out no. It didn't need to go on paper because he knew what it was. I pointed out that given that what is recorded on what they call the PR2, the prisoner record system, is official. It's an official database, that it is protected by general data protection regulations, and that he had knowingly recorded false information on it, so he was required by law to record correct information. And he still just said, no, I don't. I know what we're working to, and that's all that matters. that would pose serious problems for me, because the official one that's on the computer system and the one that I had the paper copy of is the only reference then for whoever would be filling in this hall manager's place. So I would like a actual copy of what my management plan was that was actually being worked towards. So there was no resolution to that. I ended up booking another SEL. I can't remember the date of that either. I don't have it in front of me, but that was to Glasgow, and that went all right as well. It was a bank holiday that I went out on, so it was fairly packed. But while it was a bit odd being out and about around that many people just milling about doing their own thing and doing something completely different to what I've been used to for the last nearly 2 decades, it went well. I went out, got some food, actually went to Five Guys and visited that for the first time ever. So that was, I'd say that was a good day out as well, but I was having more and more concerns about how my sentence management was going, because my community-based social worker was still refusing to sign off on my mother's home address for SELs, and I've maintained that due to my mother's health, her coming out here to visit is extremely difficult, and that I would like to use my time progressing to visit with my mum and spend some time with her. The community-based social worker was just saying, no, that's not going to happen. We don't know what kind of reaction the community would have to you turning up at your mother's house, how her neighbours would react, of you stepping out of a security van and walking into your mother's house. It was at that point I realised this guy did not have a clue about how SELs worked. I'm thinking that I turn up in a heavy-duty security van when SELs are carried out in unmarked cars. The staff wear nondescript uniforms, so there's nothing to identify who we were or anything like that, and I look completely different to how I do in all the pictures that are used of me. So my question then was, well, how are people going to recognise who I am? And the social worker went, well, I imagine your mother's neighbours know who she is, so they would put 2 and 2 together. But until we know how they're going to react, I'm not going to approve you visiting your mother. And at that point I questioned them, well, how are you going to test how they react then? Are you going to go door to door and go, how would you feel if Luke Mitchell turned up? He went, of course not, don't be ridiculous. And I went, well, how are you going to test then? How do you know how they're going to react? And he said, well, we'll just have to see as it goes. This social worker was and still is refusing to budge on these matters. I had managed to negotiate with him and the prison on having 4 place of interest SELs and then 2 social work visits as SELs to visit with him in the community. This is all done under what's called testing in the community. I found out that hard way by initially referring to it as training for release, and was immediately shouted down and told that there is no such thing as training for release. It is testing for release. Everything we do is a test. You are always being tested. There is no training for release. I tried to debate that by saying, well, for prisoners who have done extended periods in custody, surely training is what you would do before testing. And was just told there is no training, it is only testing. I then tried to point out that travelling from the prison in a car to a private office block to have a private meeting with my social worker isn't exactly training or testing in the community, and was told that there's plenty of testing from when I get out of the car in the car park and step into the offices. and the same on the way back. It really does seem to be that common sense is a punishable offence within the SPS. So I'm quickly learning there's no point even trying to argue these things, because you just end up going round and round in circles and end up more frustrated, and then that gets used against you by saying that you're confrontational and easily angered. But I kept my head cool and just kept going on with it. But I had my third SEL. That was the 5th of May 2022. Again, there were no issues. I did a bit of shopping, took a wander around, got something to eat, came back to the prison again, no issues whatsoever, and carried on. It was then in June, the end of June 2022, that I was informed at what Greenock locally describes as an RMT disclosure meeting. RMT is a risk management team meeting. The SPS rules state that prisoners must be given an opportunity to make written representations ahead of time to the RMT, but where appropriate and available, the prisoner should be allowed to make representations to the board in person, so that the board may pose any questions that they feel would be relevant to the prisoner, hear the response, and then make decisions based upon all that information. But HMP Greenock does not operate within those guidelines. It has decided that prisoners will not attend the RMTs. Only in exceptional circumstances will prisoners attend. Rarely will they be given opportunity to make written representations. Decisions are made by guessing what a prisoner's response to points would be. There's no arguing with them. You know, these are the people who are the be-all and end-all, and they make the decisions and they decide whether they're in the right or the wrong. So we threat that if you put up too much of an argument, too much of a fight about these things, that you could be deemed as not suitable for the top end and be either delayed or kicked back to closed conditions. So guys have a lot of fear about that. I was told on the 30th of June 2022 by the number one governor, the governor in charge, Morag Sterling. She had chaired an RMT in place of Jerry Watt, the deputy governor. This was meant to be an RMT to discuss my application for my first grant of temporary release, but the governor informed me that the police who were present, due to the fact that I have been placed on MAPA, the Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements, at Category 3, Level 3. So, to give an explanation of that, there are 3 categories for MAPA, which describe either the nature of offending or the type of person to be put on it. Category 1 is for sex offenders. Category 2 is for multiple instance violent offenders. Category 3 is for any person who does not fall into categories 1 or 2, but who would otherwise benefit from being placed on MAPA. That's a ridiculous wording, because nobody benefits from being placed on MAPA. You have 3 levels. The second number, level 1 is you're on it, but it's minimal intervention. Basically, you happen to be on it. They have semi-regular meetings to discuss your progress and how things are going, but otherwise it's pretty unnoticeable. Then level 2 is a more direct involvement in your life. The makeup of MAPA can vary person to person, but the agencies involved will be, when you're in custody, the prison you're currently in, both prison-based and community-based social workers, the police, the NHS healthcare, psychology services, housing, employment, virtually any state agency to do with social world, the social world can be involved. In my case, there is the prison, both sets of social work, police, NHS healthcare, and a psychiatrist, a consultant forensic clinical psychiatrist, and a consultant forensic clinical psychologist. You then have category 3, which can involve senior management with the authority to enact special measures, yet these special measures are not specified. It turns out that it's basically whatever the MAPA board wants to be enacted, and at level 3 it is a massive intrusion into every aspect of your life. If they can, they will manage you day by day, second by second. Now, I was informed by the Governor on the 30th of June 2022 that the police were carrying out what they referred to as a deep file case review of all documents they held to do with my case, and this was apparently to better inform risk management decisions. I pointed out to the Governor at that point that this was suspicious timing, given that this RMT meeting was meant to be discussing my first grant application, and the police come forward with this. Also, that this is a serious error in happening at that point, as every prisoner who transfers to National Top End has to go through a police background check before they transfer, and I had gone through that and there had been no issues, and was questioning why a year into my time at National Top End this was suddenly coming up now. I was told by the Governor that these things just happen and this is what the police had decided. I was then informed by the Governor that she had taken the decision locally to remove me from community access indefinitely until the conclusion of this deep file case review. I questioned why I was being removed from community access and was told that the prison just couldn't take the risk of me being on community access. I asked what was the risk, given that I had had 3 SELs with no incident whatsoever. The Escorted staff give a report on your behaviour and what you've done while you're out on leave for the 2 hours that you're out, and there had been no issues, no negative reporting or anything. So I questioned why I was being removed from community access. I stated that I could understand that my first grant application would be delayed for this, as it is ultimately the Scottish ministers, so the Scottish Government, who sign off on the first grant of temporary release, and that while this was going on, it was extremely unlikely that they would ever sign off on it, but surely I could continue with escorted community access to continue to build up a portfolio of low-risk behaviour. Again, I was told by the Governor that no, they just weren't willing to take that risk. I was also informed that my planned visit with my community-based social worker to take place in Port Glasgow was being cancelled. That was booked for that immediate Friday. I'm sure this disclosure, I'm sure it was a Wednesday, but I was informed that my SEL to visit my social worker had been cancelled by the governor. She had discussed it with the community-based social worker, but the governor then informed me that she had made arrangements and received assurance from my community-based social work that he would come out to the prison on that Friday to discuss these events with me. I was frustrated at this delay, and I voiced my concerns that this was purely a delaying tactic by the police, that were there anything to be reviewed, it would have been done during the background check prior to my moving to National Top End. But the governor assured me that this was not the case and that the police were just doing this to better inform risk assessment. So that was me taken off movement and informed of all this on the 30th of June 2022. I was told by the governor that this should take no more than 8 weeks to conclude, and then, assuming there were no issues, I would be put back on movement and carry on as normal. They would make the first grant application and just get going with things. But close to 8 weeks later, I was told that another RMT had been held. I was informed this time by the Deputy Governor, Jerry Watt, who had chaired this meeting, that the police had stated it was going to be, their investigations were going to take at least another 8 weeks, and then around the same time again to compile any reports and submit it to the psychologist and psychiatrist for assessment and for their report to be written up and submitted. So something that should only have taken 2 months had now been extended to 6 months. I again voiced my concerns that this was a delaying tactic, that there's no way it should be going on in the first place, and that the timescales were ridiculous at that. And was just told that no, there's obviously a lot of paperwork to go through, as you would understand. So they're doing their best. We have the police's assurance. Again, I was very frustrated at all of this. It's just yet more abuse going on. Abuse of process and abuse of me. That's the long and short of it. Pointed out that I should be continuing to get community access, that my removal from community access was a Greenock local decision and not a MAPA decision. So Greenock local could decide to put me back on movement to continue building up a portfolio of low risk behaviour, and was told that's not going to happen because they couldn't take the risk that I would run off and chain myself to a fence, knowing now that this is all going on. I asked where in my security or intelligence file it is that there's any suggestion of that's whether that's likely at all. Was told there is absolutely no suggestion of that in my intelligence file, and they do not consider it to be likely. I pointed out that it's pretty, if they consider it to be an unlikely event, it's pretty stupid to then use it as justification to remove me from movement. It wasn't even a response I got to that. They just said that's the way it is and that's the end of it. That's how things work here. I started making inquiries through my solicitor as to what exactly was going on with this. I was told that the psychologists were going to be reviewing it, and that initially I was told that it was being looked into on the grounds that there may be a pattern of similar offending with other females. I questioned that massively, pointing out that surely this is something that would have been brought up long before this point, and was told, well, not necessarily. Sometimes they just rubber stamp things and send it through. I pointed out that that would be extremely unlikely in my case, that I was just rubber stamped and sent through, given the delays I had in transferring to Greenock in the first place, due to MAPA's involvement and insistence on enhanced risk assessments against the advice of the head of clinical psychology for prisons in central Scotland. I eventually managed to get hold of a copy of the minutes from an RNT meeting that took place in April 2022, and discovered that the Deputy Governor here, Jerry Watt, had chaired that RNT, and that while it was not recorded in the minutes of the RNT through separate paperwork, I discovered that the Deputy Governor had been informed by police that they were carrying out their deep file case review from April 2022. But the Deputy Governor, in his infinite wisdom, had decided that this massive bit of information did not warrant recording in any minutes, where I am supposed to get a copy of all these minutes. I wasn't provided one, but again, that's local policy, not to follow national rules. But the Deputy Governor hadn't recorded any of this information in the minutes. He recorded 3 lines on an A4 page, basically describing that an RMT had taken place, MAPA partners were in attendance, and their next projected RMT would be sometime around June or July to discuss my first grant application. Not anything to do with the fact that the police had decided that they were going to carry out a deep file case review. It seems absolutely ridiculous that I'd been taken off movement in June because this review was going on, given that it had been going on since April. I had an SEL in May with 0 incident, and that nothing had changed between April and June of 2022. Yet it was deemed appropriate and safe for me to have community access between April and June. Nothing changes whatsoever, but from June 2022 onwards, it's not safe or appropriate for me to have community access. There's apparently too much risk. I got nowhere with that, just being told over and over again, we have to make defensible decisions, and that's what we've done. I stupidly tried to use logic to make arguments and backed it up with evidence of good behaviour on ACLs, and got nowhere with that. I then questioned, had my risk changed between April and June to warrant me being taken off movement? I knew the answer was no, because there are 3 risk categories: low, medium and high, and to be at national top end you must be low risk. If it changes at all for anything, you're removed from top end. The only answer I could get from the Deputy Governor was, your risk may potentially change in the future. Well, that is absolutely true, just as it's true of absolutely everybody. I pointed out that's not what I asked. I asked, had my risk as it stands between April and June changed? Was again informed, I've just told you your risk may potentially change in the future. And round that went for about 5 minutes, solid. That's another thing for people to know, that SPS staff receive what's called professional witness training. They claim that it is to better give evidence should they ever be called into court. It's more commonly used to confound and annoy people by not directly answering a question that's been asked of them, to give responses that sound like they're answering but that technically are not an answer. So should somebody try to call them back on it later, they can say, well, actually, no, I didn't say that. What I said was, I didn't say his risk had changed or had not changed. I said it may potentially change in the future. I was told during this meeting with the Deputy Governor, given that I was continually questioning over and over again and not getting the answer, so asking the question again until I got an answer, I was told by the hall manager that he didn't like my attitude to do with this, of trying to get a direct answer out of the Deputy Governor.
And the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence.